Oh, well, I learned as a child there's two ways to see the world as it is and the way it could be. Now, some people say that's just not my problem. Some people do what must be done. Though they see the hole in the fabric that must be sewn. They see the way blockaded and they roll back the stone. They see the day beyond the horizon and they do what must be done. Yes, some people do what must be done. Well, they do what must be done. They see the day beyond the horizon and they do what must be done.
Good morning, I'm Joanne Tunnicliffe, alias Mother Nature, and I'm acting as your moderator. Our virtual spring conference stresses doing what must be done as we look for solutions for climate change one garden at a time. Our team of Ron McMaster, Linda Sevier, and Rick Sevier produced all the advertising, the website you're going to see later on today, and the resources to support this valuable learning experience today. Now, our first Unitarian dedicated gardening teams have planned, developed, and planted a recognized urban Carolinian wildlife habitat. Sometimes looking back can help us looking forward. So I would like to now introduce Daniel Coleman, our keynote speaker for today, because he's got insights on both aspects of the statement. Daniel Coleman, a McMaster professor, has immersed his writing career studying humanity and social justice issues. He has penned numerous books and essays on humans and their interactions with the natural world. Shown on our website today is one of Daniel's most recent books, Yard Work, which is featured and carries some of these values. Daniel discusses not only local and Canadian topics, but his interests branch out into the world. Haudenosaunee and Mississauga tribes are featured in today's talk because of their connections and deep commitments to Mother Earth. And now, Danielle, enjoy yourself. I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. And I'm just really grateful to the Carolinian Wildlife Gardening team at Unitarian Church for hosting this conference in this difficult time. So many of us are finding it difficult to connect with one another and to have and share learning experiences and collective community experiences like this. And I'm grateful to Linda Sevier and Joanne Tunnicliffe and Ron McMaster for their work in putting this all together and for their work in renaturalizing the garden space around First Unitarian Church with Carolinian plantings and their wish to generate interest and knowledge around that endeavor by hosting this conference on doing what must be done. They say that a person who plants a tree today and is planting a grandmother for future generations. And the Carolinian Wildlife Gardening team is doing exactly what must be done for future generations of Hamiltonians. I'm very happy to contribute from my own learning curve towards this wonderful endeavor, even in this adapted format of Zoom conferencing. I've been told I should speak for 25 minutes and then we'll have a few minutes for questions that you can send in by means of the chat function. So please send those in and I'll be glad to try to answer them as best I can. One of the gifts of living here in the Carolinian bioregion at the head of the lake of Lake Ontario is that Indigenous people who have lived in this region for thousands of years have rich knowledge developed in this very place and are generous about sharing it. It's been my privilege and my challenge to encounter Six Nations colleagues and students during my years of working as a professor at McMaster University and to have begun retraining my mind to the wisdom of teachings that grew from this very region and climate zone. In a way, I could say that by coming to live and work here in Hamilton and at McMaster University, I've been enrolled in the Carolinian School for Decolonizing the Mind and Heart. I'm hoping I can share a little bit of that unlearning and then relearning with you today. For the past couple of years, or number of years, I've been exploring with Haudenosaunee colleagues the teachings of what some people have called the grandfather of all the treaties, the Two-Row Wampum, which set the groundwork for nation-to-nation partnerships between First People and incoming Europeans in North America. I don't have time today to lay out all its details, and there are so many, but it's at the heart of this agreement is a commitment to ongoing dialogue between autonomous people and their worldviews, between Indigenous people paddling their own canoe and Europeans traveling in their sailing ship. There's so much to be gained from this understanding of dialogue between different ways of knowing, different ways of understanding and doing things. And I hope you will see the value of this kind of dialogue in the thoughts I will share with you today on how big is your family. It's not like Western culture has never thought of the earth as family. People use the phrase Mother Earth all the time. And there's the beloved St. Francis of Assisi, who famously spoke of Brother Sun and Sister Moon in his much-loved Canticle of the Creatures. This is not the place for me to go into a lengthy theological argument about how Francis's understanding of creation was part of his overall challenge to the imperial Christianity of his times. What we can simply observe here is that his references to the elements of nature as family members, Sir Brother Sun, Sister Moon, Brother Wind, Sister Water, Brother Fire, and Sister Mother Earth, were easily understandable to his 13th century European followers, and that they remain a major reason why people think of Francis as the patron saint of environmentalism to this day. But it's also the case that St. Francis is often infantilized for his belief. His childlike innocence has been seen by many as endearing, but hopelessly naive, meaning unscientific and unredeemably medieval. He stands in, you could say, for our culture's period of innocence, way back in the Dark Ages, before the Enlightenment and the complexities and sophistication of modern times. Today, someone read me St. Francis of Assisi, writes the Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa in 1917. I listened and I couldn't believe my ears. How could a man who was so fond of things never have looked at them or understood what they were? Why call water my sister if water isn't my sister? To feel it better? I feel it better by drinking it, better than by calling it something, sister or mother or daughter. Water is beautiful because it's water. If I call it my sister, I can see, even as I call it that it's not my sister. And it's best to call it water since that's what it is. Or better yet, not to call it anything, but to drink it, to feel it on my wrists, and to look at it without any names. Fernando Pessoa lived at the high water mark of European modernity. His was a period in Europe and America when people expressed remarkable trust in the ability of enlightened people to smooth out life's difficulties and nature's challenges through human ingenuity, whether through smart technology, well-oiled mechanisms of governance, or sophisticated social and economic systems. Pessoa was part of that first generation of Europeans for whom hot water ran out of a tap and a sewer took away the dirty water for treatment. He died in 1935, just when fascism was arriving in Europe and the dictator Salazar's regime in Portugal would reveal how belief in the grandeur of modern progress could give rise as readily to genocide and political disappearances as it could to the development of penicillin or vehicle airbags. For hypermodernists like Pessoa, calling water your sister only confuses things. You don't drink your sister, you don't bathe in your sister. Modernist logic appeals to many of us because it seems practical and simple. Water is water. It feels good on your wrist when you're washing your hands. It quenches your thirst. In fact, if you think of water as your family, you may hesitate to use it to wash your hands or take a drink. And then where would we be? Pessoa's practical literalism, if you want to call it that, is suspicious of the distortion that happens when we personify the world around us, when we sweep non-human things into our human categories and forget that they're different from us. But it doesn't take much imagination to see how this equation can work the other way around too. If you don't think of having some kind of relationship with water, maybe not as a family member, but at least as a living being that feeds and nurtures you and that you must care for, then it's much easier for the objectified properties of water, its cool feeling on your skin, its ability to quench your thirst, its capacity to take away dirt, to become services or commodities. If water is purely an inanimate, inert object, if it's completely thingified, it's easier to put it in a plastic bottle and sell it. You can run it into pipes, into buildings, and charge people for it. You can privatize it. You can block its natural flow down a river and contain it in lake-sized reservoirs. You can force it through channels or pipes over turbines to create electricity. You can pump it up towers and run it through pipes to your kitchen sink or your toilet. The rejection of water as a sister is necessary to treating it with this kind of detachment, and treating it with detachment is necessary to all these practical functions. But what do we do now in late modernity, now that we have seen what a century and a half of flushing millions of toilets into the watershed is doing, not just to water lilies and fish, but to our own future? Maybe the problem lies not in calling water our sister. The problem isn't in thinking of the beings of nature as family, but in our concept of family itself. The human-centric idea that family is always and only human. And here is where a dialogue with Indigenous ways of knowing may help us see things a little differently. There's a wonderful book published by the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force back in the late 1990s called The Words That Come Before All Else, Environmental Philosophies of the Haudenosaunee. In the chapter she contributed to this book, Sally Benedict, who's Akwesasne Mohawk, begins her story about her family by explaining how Mohawk language conveys a concept of motherhood quite different from how we usually understand the term in English. In Mohawk culture, she says, the word for my mother is Haudenosaunee. It is also the special word of respect we use when referring to our mother's sisters or aunts. We use this special word of respect as part of a special cultural support mechanism, she says. The child and the child's mother acknowledge that there is support for other mothers if the biological mother should die. This explanation aligns with Tyendinaga Mohawk David Miracle's discussion of the words for mother and aunt in his Mohawk language thematic dictionary. For mother, Ista'a, this term is similar to that given for aunt, as it is based on the matrilineal tradition that a woman's sisters were also considered to be mother to her children. There is the variation, Ista'a, used by some speakers to differentiate between the biological mother and her sisters. He also talks about the special extension of this term to the idea of Mother Earth in the long-term Yatenyasta'a Umansagega. This brief tracing of Mohawk terms for motherhood make it easy to see how the idea of mother conveyed in Mohawk language extends the basic actions of mothering, of nurturing and sustaining life, from biological mothering to the circle of aunties mothering to the circle of creation's mothering. You see, the titles for family relations in Haudenosaunee languages, mother, brother, auntie, grandfather, sister, and so on, aren't nouns like they are in English. They aren't just titles for permanent states of being. As my Mohawk language teacher, Tom Deere, once told the class I took, the terms of family relations are not so much noun facts like they are in English. They're activities, more like verbs. One is a mother by doing the action of mothering, not just by the fact of having given birth, but by the ongoing doing of mothering. The one who mothers is our mother. She is the one who, to borrow our conference title, is doing what must be done. The one who brothers us is our brother. The one who does the actions of sistering beyond the biological linkage is our sister. And this action-oriented idea of relation does not stop at the borderline of humanness. Water does watering. Earth does the uplifting, rooting, supporting actions of grounding everything. As such, Mother Earth does the everyday work of grounded normativity, of grounding the normative conditions of our lives. She is doing what must be done. Benedict goes on to explain how this wider circle of motherhood operated in her own family history. She says, "My grandmother, Haudenosaunee, was orphaned when she was just a baby. She was taken in by her mother's sister, Haudenosaunee. Haudenosaunee raised several other nieces and nephews who lost their parents when they passed away prematurely. She raised 7 in all. My grandmother, Haudenosaunee, was raised by Haudenosaunee, whom she called sister. She was actually my grandmother's first cousin, who was also cared for by Haudenosaunee." Sally Benedict tells of how the great aunt she grew up calling her grandmother, Haudenosaunee, was renowned for her skill in making baskets from black ash splints and from sweetgrass. She participated actively in the circle of motherhood that passed on these skills to Benedict's mother. So Benedict writes, "Haudenosaunee taught my mother plant medicines and their uses, our relationship with the earth and the elements of creation, how to give proper thanksgiving to the Creator, how to till the earth, how to prepare fish, how to store and save food for the winter, how to collect food from the earth, and great knowledge about the environment within Akwesasne. This is all mother's knowledge that is passed on from a mother to her children." Later in life, Haudenosaunee used to get a ride from Benedict's father to a place where sweetgrass grew downstream from where he worked as an electrician at Alcoa, the aluminum smelter in Massena, New York, that is upstream and upwind from Akwesasne, and a reserve which straddles the St. Lawrence, right where New York, Ontario, and Quebec all share the river borders. There she would pick sweetgrass all day while he was at work, and then take the vanilla and honey-scented bundles she had collected there home when he picked her up again at the end of his shift. She used sweetgrass in her basket weaving. Like many basket weavers, she would hold its stems in her mouth as she weaved. Benedict says she was remarkably health conscious, harvesting and eating only foods supplied by Mother Earth all of her life. So the family was shocked when she died of stomach cancer at age 80. Well, she was 80 after all, so maybe the cancer was just bad luck. But of all the cancers, why cancer of the stomach? Several years later, they came upon Alcoa conducting a massive earth removal project in the fields where Haudenosaunee used to pick sweetgrass. Acres of soil were being carried away in trucks. The earth of the picking place had been contaminated by toxins from the aluminum plant, and the corporation had been ordered to remove the hazard. Here's where Benedict's story takes a turn, swerving into a story of how the web of relationships gets twisted, how motherhood gets distorted. The land her grandmother trusted as Yete Ston Ungwangtsegega, meaning our Mother Earth, had been poisoned, and it had been passed on the poison to her. Alcoa's demonstrated belief that the land is not your mother, supported by a legal system of land ownership that assumes land does not constitute the circle of support that mothers and sustains you, enabled the corporation and its industrial partners in the region, General Motors and Reynolds Metals, to consider it an inanimate service site where chemicals could be discharged without harming their family's health and welfare. If pressed, the corporation's lawyers could demand absolute proof that the toxins their family spewed into the air and watershed and then rained down onto the sweetgrass fields were definitely what killed her. They could also defend Alcoa's activities in the neighborhood by pointing out how they did nurture and sustain Akwesasne residents by giving them jobs. Don't forget that Haudenosaunee son-in-law was employed there as an electrician. This is the most common way that our hyper-industrialized society translates nurturance and care from the world of intimate relations to objective and economic ones. It's all very well, we think, to consider the earth as your mother when you're a child, but eventually you have to grow up and smell the coffee, toughen up and get a job. Realize that it's sweet to give your kids a hug at bedtime, but if you really want to show them your love, bring home a paycheck. Understanding our relations with the earth as familial, as an intimate circle of support, threatens our capacity to extract paychecks from it. If I had unlimited time, I would go on to quote statistics from the Environmental Protection Agency and from the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force about high concentrations of PCBs in the St. Lawrence River and in its tributaries, the Grass and Raquette rivers and the surrounding area. I would talk about the pollution of air and land and water all around Alcoa. The point is that to extract paychecks from aluminum smelting in Akwesasne, you have to draw lines between your human family and the surrounding ecosystem. Rather than thinking of the water in the river as your sister, you have to think of it as an inanimate thing that can be diverted to create electricity or to transport bauxite in and cast aluminum out. We're talking literally about the health of the river. We're talking literally about the health of the air and of the surrounding fields and streams, and of the sweetgrass, and of the aunties and mothers and grandmothers who weave sweetgrass with black ash splints into baskets. We're talking about large-scale manufacturers who take up residence within all our communities, offering jobs and paychecks, but reject the idea of being relatives with the living beings who make up these communities. We're talking about conflicting understandings of family. In his opening chapter to The Words That Come Before All Else, Six Nations Confederacy lawyer Paul Guyanaze Williams says, "We will spend our lifetimes continually learning who our relatives are and learning to give them proper thanks." Stories like that of Haudenosaunee family are accumulating throughout industrial growth societies around the world. From the toxic properties of abandoned plastics floating around the world's oceans and runaway fires spreading around the world to billions of liters of untreated wastewater released into Shadot Creek and the Coots Paradise watershed. These are all stories of denied intimacy, of disrespect, and of rejected reciprocity with our non-human Carolinian neighbors. Why call water your sister if she's not your sister? Fernando Pessoa may not have foreseen how the system that ran the water to his kitchen tap in Portugal could eventually run PCBs into his bloodstream. For example, the industrialized Tagus River running through Lisbon is hardly crystal clear. But it is within the scope of our lifetimes to relearn who our relatives are, close to us as the liquid running through our own veins and beating hearts. This is what I see the Carolinian Wildlife Garden team who are sponsoring this conference encouraging us to do, to take a look around ourselves in this unique and startlingly beautiful bioregion and to see all of its beings as neighbors, as family, to live within these relationships in an interactive, gentle, and respectful way. If water is my sister, then I can't dump sewage into her thoughtlessly. if the oak savannas of the Dundas Valley or the white cedars clinging to the escarpment cliffs are my grandmothers or my cousins, I won't feed them toxic air or polluted water. I won't crowd them out with Phragmites or purple loosestrife or English ivy. In the ongoing process of continually learning who my Carolinian relatives are, I'll do what must be done. I'll learn how to give them room to breathe so that I can breathe too. A city to grow in so that I can grow too. Places to love and be nurtured in so that I can be loved and nurtured too. I'll do what Sally Benedict suggests we all do at the end of her discussion of black ash, sweetgrass, aunties, and mothers, where she writes, plant ground cover, plant trees, plant flowers that are indigenous to this environment. And that's what our next speaker, Mara McAfee, will be talking about in our next session at 11 o'clock. Thanks so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions. And I guess we turn it back over now to Linda Sivier, who's going to be fielding the chat section so that we can look at some of the questions people may have. Thanks very much.
Hi, Daniel. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good. Thank you. I found that quite moving, actually. A reminder to our participants or our viewers, if you have a chat question for Daniel or any other speaker, and you're not sure how to do that, hover the cursor over the chat box at the bottom of your screen and click on it, and you will see a place to write a message at the bottom of that little box. And type in your message and hit enter, and you'll be there. Okay, I have one to start off with, Daniel.
Sure.
I found it really interesting the way you talk about viewing our natural resources as commodities to be used versus viewing them respectfully as mother or relative. Do you feel at all hopeful that there's any hope of progress here? Are we getting to a point where you see that maybe we're reaching some kind of tipping point? What are the signs that you see of hope, or do you see hopeful signs?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and such a vital one in the domain of environmentalism and thinking about the ecologies we live in. And one of the things that I have found very helpful about, and a gift of living here in the Hamilton Bay region, is seeing what small activities can do. So since I was talking about water, let's just think about Cootes Paradise, which has been in the news so much of late because of the spill that occurred in Shadow Creek that John Terpstra will be talking about later. But over the years, the short number of years I've lived in this region, Cootes has really improved a lot through the work that basically the RBG has been doing over the past number of years. One, to keep carp from stirring up the bottom sediments so that plants can regrow, and then replanting a whole series of native plants to reoxygenate that water so that species have been returning there, fish species and bird species, that has really been transformative. And that's happened in a pretty quick turn of time, like in ecological time, to have that kind of turnaround take place within 15, 20 years is fast, you know. And this is the thing, is that it reminds you that these kinds of activities can have a big effect. I heard Thijs Thijsmeijer, who's the environmental coordinator for the RBG, say that half the fish of Western Lake Ontario are born in Cootes Paradise. So if that water is restoring and we have baby fish, fish fry being born there, we're also having a huge impact on Lake Ontario more generally. And that's how ecology works, right? So about hope, I think learning reciprocity, thinking of Cootes Paradise as our relative, helps us begin to think, oh, how can we act in a responsible way in relation to this body of water Today I can't do something about the Pacific Ocean, but today I can at least do something for Shidok or for Coots. It's right in my neighborhood. And there's hope in that kind of the responsiveness of creation and nature to those kinds of local initiatives.
And do you feel that there is a possibility of creating a balance?
Well, that's what we're aiming for, right? To regain balance. Balance, as we all know, is dynamic and volatile, not a static thing. Mm-hmm. So yes, we aim to regain balance, and you can see that a better balance is visible in the sky, in the air that we breathe around Hamilton these days than it was 20 years ago. Is it totally balanced? Not exactly, but those are things that we work towards, right? And then things happen in the meantime. Since I was mentioning Coots Paradise, there was, as we all now know, that release of untreated water into Coots down Shidok Creek. It doesn't extinguish the better balance that was achieved over those 20 years of time, but it is another imposition, and it requires recovery time again. Just like there was from the high water levels that Lake Ontario had, and that washed over the fishway and then brought a lot of carp back into Coots Paradise. You know, these things balance, or these things are dynamic, right? And so it requires a constant relationship rather than just a one-time effort or a one-time project.
Thank you. There is time, I think, for one more question. This is from Christy. She says, I'm curious about the colonizer language related to the Carolinian life zone from King Charles Empire. Are there other names we can use for this distinct ecozone? Any thoughts or comments about this?
Well, just to say, first of all, thank you for that observation and alertness, because the language we use so often does carry these it carries this kind of historical freight and slants the way we are able to do things. I don't know if I have a good answer to a better name for the bioregion that we're in. I've heard lots of people talk about this area as the head of the lake, but we know that the forest zone is much larger than that. Maybe Christy has good ideas about what that language could be. I would just add that you inherit things, you know, from the cultural history of the region you're in. I was involved in a project recently on rethinking the area just a little bit west of Coots Paradise. And the person who started the project called it Designing Paradise. And I was thinking, oh, calling this thing paradise is such a problem, you know, and this is what we do. And there's such a long historical freight or luggage on that term paradise. But it is the word that people know for this area. And so to be able to encourage people to become involved, we needed to say, well, you know, where did we mean? So there's a lot of kind of compromises with those things. And maybe part of our collective re-education is to be aware of that this language comes from the King Charles Empire period. So thanks for the alert, Christy.
There will be one more later for you, Daniel, that we'll send to you. And now we're back to Joanne.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for enlightening so many of us. That was amazing. Knowledge from our past does indeed strengthen us in doing what must be done today. We need to support Mother Nature over and over again.